Hi guys, I'm Asher. Today we'll talk about what happened after the final events of the 4th season. I will relate 2 scenes in particular. The first will be a scene where Belle's friends go to greet him after he was released from the hospital where he was being treated. The second will be a scene in which Hestia is updating Belle's status, and it is revealed how much his stats went up after surviving the expedition to the deep floors. That said, I have a question for you guys. Do you think there will be a 5th season of DanMachi? I hope so, but I'm not really sure. I guess it will depend on whether or not season 4 was successful enough in Japan. But well, let me know your opinion in the comments. By the way, as a precaution, I have created a secondary channel, so please subscribe to that channel as well. Also, if you like my videos and want to help the channel, you can do it on Patreon or by becoming a member here on YouTube. The links will be in the description. But well, without anything else to say, let's get started. Under a beautiful blue sky, Belle, who had just emerged from the pure white stone building known as the Hospital of the DanMachi Familia, was greeted by members of the Hestia Familia, the Miyake Familia, and furthermore the Takemikazuchi Familia, who were waiting for him. They were gathered on the main northwest street, known as the Adventurers Street. Belle had his arm immobilized, specifically, his left arm was wrapped in a metal frame and hanging in a sling. 2 weeks had passed since the conclusion of the joint expedition, which included the encounter with the huge moss, the atrocities of Jura Harma, and the desperate march through the deep levels. Belle had badly injured his left arm in his fight against the Juggernaut, and although he'd equipped a supporter as a protective measure, he'd ended up overtaxing his arm anyway. That inevitably earned him a thorough scolding from Amid, during his follow-up appointment earlier that day. The terrifying tongue lashing he'd received from Dea Saint, a girl often likened to an exquisite porcelain doll, and famous for her calm, collected demeanor as much as she was for her skill, had been harsh enough to singe Belle's white hair. The cast was made not of bandages and plaster but dear adamantite. Despite the light weight of the refined metal, it hammered home the healer's intent, which was, "Thou shalt not move." When Belle arrived for his checkup, Amid's fury had been evident. She told Belle that if he didn't obey her, the next time she saw him she would tie him to the infirmary bed. Remembering that scene from a few minutes ago, Belle's whole body trembled. Amid lived up to her reputation as a kind, professional healer who never, ever turned her back on a patient, but for Belle, that guarantee was now as terrifying as any dragon's flaming breath. He'd learned his lesson that there was nothing so fearsome as the rage of a beautiful woman, especially one who was normally gentle. While Belle told his friends everything that had happened, the members of the Hestia Familia couldn't help but feel a little sad to see their captain in such a state. On the other hand, Naza tried to convince Belle that she and her family could cure him faster than the DanMachi Familia. This was because Miyake Familia and DanMachi Familia were business rivals, and Naza and her comrades in Miyake Familia were friendly with Hestia Familia. This time, though, they had referred their regular to Amid. Or perhaps it was more accurate to say they had entrusted him to her, believing that her renowned skills could heal him, just like when DanMachi Familia provided Naza with a prosthetic arm after she had lost her own limb in the past. While her patron god Miyake was relatively forthcoming, Naza seemed determined to deny that Belle was in good hands, even though her grumbling was ultimately in jest. Naza told Belle that it was a pity that the Miyake Familia was not in charge of the treatment to heal Belle's arm, as Cassandra had been frustrated for several days that she had not been able to have a private talk with him. Naza added a mischievous laugh and a sly grin at the end. Cassandra cried out hysterically, her face turning red as a berry. Belle was confused, so he politely asked Cassandra if she needed someone to talk to. At that moment, the blue-haired girl lost her composure. Clumsily, the girl tried to explain to him that she was simply worried about his health condition, and since she did not want to bother him, she had hesitated whether or not to visit him at the medical center. Cassandra's words had only become increasingly incoherent, as she received a withering look from Daphne next to her. Then, Belle remembered that he had promised Cassandra that they would have a nice long talk once the expedition was over. So he told her that they would have that talk the next time he went to visit her at her family's store. With her cheeks flushed at the smiling Belle, Cassandra ended up overwhelmed with emotion. Daphne finally raised her voice at her friend, who was currently trying to hide behind her. As Belle watched the scene in bewilderment, Velf took the floor and asked him if he knew why Ryu had not come. Belle told him that it was probably because Ryu was too busy working at Mia's tavern. Although he also said that he felt as if she was avoiding him, since he hadn't seen her for a few days. In front of DanMachi's Familia's infirmary were gathered representatives of every familia that had participated in the alliance. As all of them had endured the grueling expedition together, they had assembled to greet Belle, whose injuries had been the most serious. The only one absent, aside from Aisha, who'd grumbled about being summoned by her patron deity, was Ryu. As Belle worriedly contemplated the possibility that he'd somehow unknowingly offended Ryu. Elves were a notably meticulous race, after all. Lily's expression shifted as she put the pieces together. But she said nothing. There was nothing to say, she merely grumbled. Lily began to suspect that Ryu, like Cassandra, was slowly succumbing to Belle's charms. Then, Belle told his friends that he would take some time to rest before returning to the dungeon. After all, resting was also the job of an adventurer, his goddess had taught him that. And so ended the meeting with his friends. The sky was completely blue, there was not a single cloud. It seemed that nature was finally granting a moment of respite to the group of adventurers who had overcome terrible hardships. Shortly after the reunion between comrades, Belle returned to his family's home. Hestia and Belle were in an unoccupied room on the second floor of Hearthstone Manor. There was a lot to do since everyone had returned safely from the expedition, and Hestia had just updated the boy's status. Or, rather, she was doing it. Since the status update required the follower to be shirtless, the two were alone in the room. The goddess was speechless when she saw how much Belle's statistics had increased. Hestia was tempted to throw on her usual cheerful smile and make a show of wiping her forehead like she usually did after a status update. However, that would have been nothing more than refusing to come to grips with reality. Belle's ability score total was over 3,400. That was unmistakably a personal best for the boy. It might even have broken a public record. It was a score that could only be obtained if an adventurer did not update his status at all for a long time, in order to accumulate large amounts of Excelia and then make a big status update. But it was useless to compare that situation with Belle's current status. Hestia couldn't even brag. Because the amount was proof that the adventurer in question had survived a series of utterly brutal encounters, and if any of them had gone badly, they wouldn't even be around anymore. Belle was also somewhat shocked to see how much his stats had risen. But somehow he didn't seem as surprised as Hestia. After all, he remembered the countless times he had almost died during that expedition. On the other hand, Hestia had heard all about the expedition. The Moss Huge alone would have been bad enough, but they'd faced other exceptional opponents like the Lambton and the Juggernaut, not to mention how they ended up being chased into the deep levels and nearly dying in the process of wandering around down there. Just hearing about it made her nearly pass out. Actually, she had passed out. And now, as she looked at the numbers on Belle's status that corroborated that harrowing story, she couldn't help but cradle her head. The goddess asked the boy to tell the other family members that she would update their statuses another day, as she felt tired. Hearing Hestia speak in such a lifeless tone, Belle immediately looked very apologetic. When Belle's guild advisor eventually heard about this, she'd probably slam her head into the table. I sure sympathize with that, she thought. Hestia thought about going for a drink with Aina the next time she went to see her. She stared into space, distracted by the daydream. The truth was that Belle seemed on the verge of leveling up, but Hestia kept that to herself. It was just a hunch of hers, after all. Belle had just reached level 4, and it hadn't been long since the last Enatus. Hestia feared that the gods would go crazy with excitement if she revealed that Belle was ready to level up again after such a short period of time. As Hestia argued with herself internally, she heaved a long, deep sigh. You've really grown, haven't you, Belle? Then, summoning her confidence, she continued. From the time we met until now, you really have grown so much. The boy only blinked in response as she smiled at him, the very first person to ever join her familia. And well, that was all for today. I hope you liked the video. If you liked it, please leave a thumbs up, share the video and leave your opinion in the comments. I will be reading your opinions. Also join Discord, there we can talk about DanMachi and even other animes. The link is in the video description. Best regards and see you next time.